is the most willing to see an entrapment defense in these cases. If you look at the previous cases of entrapment, one of the things that has worked against defendants and I think works against Muhammad is the horrific nature of the plot. In these sting operations, the FBI has a lot of control over it, and they can choose how ambitious the plot will be. And the more ambitious it is, the more horrific, the less likely it is that a jury is going to be sympathetic. So instead of being in the case of Muhammad, he said he wanted to bomb Portland's Pioneer Square. The FBI could have put together, a plot where he had a little bomb that would have just blew up a few cars and maybe killed a dozen people. But instead, the plot involved this huge bomb that was going to level blocks of Portland. And so where the Department of Justice has a real advantage in arguing these cases is having that kind of shock and awe, where they can go to a jury and say, this man standing before you wanted to commit an act of terrorism and was going to level blocks, and this is how many people were killed. So really, if you're interested in these cases, and I'm so glad there's so many of you are here, this is really the best place to be, because I think this is the best test case yet of these types of sting operations. One thing we can say is that these types of sting operations are only increasing. If you look at a recent case in New York, there was a man who plotted to bomb the Federal Reserve building. There was another case recently in Miami. And in all of these cases, there's a really clear thread, which is that either an informant or an undercover agent was used as the primary operative, almost as an agent provocateur in some cases, and that none of these men had capacity on their own. None of them had any access to weapons. It was the government itself that provided these weapons. So what my book raises a question about and tries to point at is that these people are odious. They say terrible and hateful things, but on their own they're not terrorists. And I think there's a potential to think, well, how could I be sympathetic to this guy? And in some cases you really can't be sympathetic. But what you can be, hopefully you can realize is that many of these people are really just dupes. They're on the fringes of society. They are economically desperate and mentally ill, and yet we've built this structure that is spending billions of dollars looking for terrorists, and people that perhaps in a better funded system may have gone into the mental health facilities or in the social service programs are being swept up into these terrorism programs. And we're not really finding people who would commit acts of terrorism. We're finding people who maybe aspire for whatever reason or say they want to commit an act of terrorism, but on their own have no capacity. And then the FBI presents them with that capacity and is able to charge them as terrorists and ultimately subject them to minimum sentencing guidelines that on their own they never would have been able to build a crime capable enough to meet those guidelines. And so I think this is as much a story about terrorism as it is about justice, the fairness of justice in the United States, the administration of that justice. And I think ultimately this is the type of case that when we think of terrorism, this is what we should be thinking about. When the government says, okay, we've foiled another terrorist plot, I hope the next time you hear that, you'll ask yourself, well, was there an informant used? What was the capability of the person? And I think what you'll find is that in every case, the informant played a role of an agent provocateur. On their own, they never had capacity, but the FBI provided everything that they needed. In some cases, like in Muhammad even paying his rent when he was about to be evicted. So that's really the basis of this. I thought if anyone has questions about the Portland case in particular, or just in general, I'd be happy to answer it. Yes?
So I'm a little bit curious about the recorder malfunction, and I'm not an attorney, so I can't really say how it would play out. But it would seem like the defense would want to question the FBI about the specific nature of the recorder malfunction. And I'm assuming that short of committing perjury, the FBI would have to give more details about what screwed up and how it screwed up, and enough of these questions were asked about these recorder malfunctions over and over again, the truth might come out.
Right. That's a great question, because this is a consistent problem.